And I find students get a sense of like, wow, my unit chair lecturer has really put in time and effort into creating something special for them. The OER is designed by nature to create an engaging learning environment, taking the educator through, how to facilitate that. So it's having an impact on their learning, which is obviously the key thing, but also their professional lives as well.
Welcome to Speaking of Open, the podcast where we explore the vibrant world of open education in Australasia. I'm Ash Barber, an academic librarian and senior coordinator of the OER Collective at the Council of Australasian University Librarians.
And I'm Mace Fatayr, Learner Experience Design Manager at University of Technology, Sydney. I'm passionate about inclusive and engaging learning through technology. We are friends and open education advocates, here to share stories, park ideas, and celebrate the amazing work happening across our region.
In each episode, we chat with educators, librarians, and learning designers who are transforming teaching and learning through open practices.
So today, we're joined by Dr. Sarah Steen from Deakin University, who shares her journey creating a powerful open educational resource that helps students navigate real-world workplace conversations. I really enjoyed reading this case study where you can really feel Sarah's warmth as she shares her journey in creating the OER workplace role-play scenarios, which includes 15 realistic activities to build key workplace skills.
So, speaking of open, should we dive into the conversation?
Let's do that.
Welcome, Sarah, to the pod. Very excited to have you here today. To get started, could you tell us a little bit about your role and what brings you to this work?
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. So, I'm a course director and lecturer from Deakin University. So, I'm the course director of the Bachelor of Human Resource Management Psychology, which is a unique dual accredited 3-year undergraduate course, which allows students to delve into the fundamentals of psychological science and HRM to explore the human mind in a business context. So, a very interesting course. This is also my 14th year in teaching in higher education. So at the moment, I'm teaching 2 undergraduate HR units. And so for one of the units, I developed an OER for the unit called Workplace Conflict Resolution. So that's a unit where students develop skills in workplace negotiation, mediation, and also difficult conversations. So my OER is called Workplace Roleplay Scenarios, Practice Navigating Difficult Conversations, Negotiation, and Mediation. And what it comprises of is 15 role plays. So I created 15 role plays, which were inspired by real life situations to give students an authentic learning experience. And the best part about it is it's not content specific. So any educational provider can easily use the scenarios along with their specific course curriculum. So for example, if you were teaching negotiation, you might like to use one of the negotiation scenarios and ask students to apply the specific negotiation content that you're covering in your course, which is, of course, aligned to your and their learning outcomes. And the reflection questions I've included in the OER can be tailored to actually prompt students to reflect on and evaluate how they did, for example, in that negotiation scenario. So the decision to actually make it non-content specific was very intentional. It means that it can be adapted and implemented by any educational providers. And so because of that, the OER has actually had a wider impact. So it's reaching Australian and international universities, which is really exciting. It's listed as course material for 2 Australian universities, and it's had several thousand visitors from Australian and international universities. And actually, just recently, I had an academic reach out from Germany, a university in Germany, with positive feedback on the OER, particularly around the real world settings, which has been fantastic. So this little OER that I created for my students is also contributing more widely to learning environments across other universities in Australia and internationally, which is very fulfilling and, what a fantastic contribution to students' learning environments.
That's so exciting. Global recognition, getting messages from Germany. So you mentioned that adaptability was a focus of the text. Was that really quite an important aspect to you from the start?
Yeah, good question. So initially, when I wanted to develop the OER, I actually wanted to develop a textbook. So I was like, yep, let's do a textbook. I wanted to write some content around negotiation, mediation, adjusting and thinking about difficult conversations. And then I was really thinking about the fact that I am just rewriting what is already there. We already have some fantastic negotiation textbooks. And I really thought about, well, what is going to really help students? I went back to look at the purpose of the unit learning outcomes, the student learning outcomes, what is it that our employers want from our graduates? And it was really apparent that they need to develop the skills. And so with that in mind and thinking about the resource, I thought, well, let's, the fact that I can develop some role plays that are specific to my students in those areas, but also widely adapted was just an added benefit. And it's been fantastic to see that, it has been picked up by other Australian and international universities.
And so this is the book that you wrote a case study about in the book Open Education Down Under OER Australasian Case Studies. Can you tell us a little bit about the case study?
Yeah, would love to. So it's a part of a really exciting project. And so it is for teaching academics. The chapter I wrote, I specifically wrote for teaching academics who are really thinking about perhaps taking a new idea and converting it into a new OER. So really the aim of the chapter was to inspire educators to think about open practice, to promote equity in education, and to really give them some tips on navigating and overcoming the challenges in creating an OER from my experience as someone who has created one. In terms of the case study I wrote, it's broken into many sections around the key stakeholders, which I call my support lifeline, background information, so the idea and the so what, the key outcomes, and also the learning and recommendation. So navigating some of those roadblocks. And it also ends with a few tips for those educators wanting to develop their own OER.
I think that's one of the key things about the book of case studies as a whole, isn't it? To try and provide a space where other academics can see their peers working in this space and gather some of those practical tips on how to get more involved or how to adapt what they're already doing and just seeing other ways of doing this in our region. So I think your case study is a really wonderful addition to the book.
Very interesting, Sarah. I really enjoy listening to academics as they describe the process of creating open educational resources. And while reading your case study, you've mentioned in many sections that the first encounter, the first time you heard about open educational resources. That was a really interesting segment that I come across. So how did you navigate that? If I take you one step back, how did you navigate that unfamiliarity in the process and the new terms that you encountered and your tips for navigating new ways of developing educational material?
Yeah, really good question. So at Deakin University, I was part of the first cohort that went through, they had a funding grant, and I was, obviously lucky enough to get one of those. So it was a relatively new area. I didn't know much about it at all. So we were really fortunate that we had some fantastic, and we still do have fantastic open education librarians who I asked lots of questions of. We also have an OER community and a copyright team at Deakin. So I really reached out to them, asked a lot of questions. They had experience in OERs and open education, so I could ask a lot of those questions. Did lots of Googling. And I think, as OERs are becoming more known, naturally people are becoming a bit more aware of it, the process, the terminology. But I would also really suggest reaching out to others who have gone through the process. There's a lot of us now who have created some fantastic OERs, reaching out, asking questions and learning from their experience and asking, how did you start? As I mentioned earlier, I had a completely different idea to start with. And then once I sort of got going, pivoted my ideas. So reaching out from those who have been through the process will really help you through that process.
Yeah, wonderful. Being a friend to third space practitioners is a good tip, and reaching out is usually, in my also experience, I find people are very generous and always open.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
I looked into your OER, and as reading through some of the scenarios, I started imagining how we can integrate those case studies in different contexts. And I like how you structured that with some guidance to the reader on even how much time they need to spend on each activity, on each like part of the activity. That was really interesting. What is your guidance for academics who would like to look into your scenarios and adapt them into a different context? What would be your recommendation on how to go about integrating these scenarios? I've come across scenarios, for example, in business and project management dispute, and if I want to take this into a professional context, for example, or if I want to take this to a teaching context, in, for example, Faculty of Business, what are your recommendations there?
Yeah, good question. As I mentioned earlier, the scenarios are not tied to any content, so you can apply the content to it. I would first start by being really clear on what it is that you're wanting them to learn that from that particular topic. So sometimes negotiation is a common topic, even in, your law topics and business topics. It might just be a once off. So being really clear on what you actually want students to achieve from that. So is it that you're wanting them to learn the negotiation process? Is it specific skills? So the unit that I take is very skills based. And so we want them to practice in that scenario, applying the negotiation process, but ultimately, they're developing skills along the way. So having that clear understanding of what is it that you want students to take away from that particular topic and being really clear on that. Then it's about, okay, let's, go into the seminar, having a real clear understanding yourself of the scenario and the time frame around it. So I'm very fortunate that we have 2-hour seminars on a weekly basis, and so we're able to cover some extensive cases on a weekly basis. And then being open to trialing it. So really, what I'm finding when I first started writing the OER is that I could trial the role plays in the class setting. And it's about yourself being familiar with it, the time constraints, but also providing that space for students. So it is very daunting for our 19, 20-year-olds or all the way up to our mature age students as well, stepping into these type of role play scenarios. So I would suggest, and this is what we do to sort of start our trimester off, or in a trimester based at Deakin, is that we start with icebreakers and really trying to get familiar with each other before we're expecting students to step into a role play where they're taking on a role. And I tell students that, we're there to support them. So we start with smaller scenarios first and we build up to the more lengthier ones. And it's really, really important that we have that scaffolding approach, particularly around the reflection. So it's all very well that we, put them into the role play, that they have a go, but we really need to have that debrief time between students, getting them to think about how did it go? What did they learn from it? What would have helped them in the future scenarios? Those kind of questions to get them to really think about how they went, and then coming back as a seminar group together on how they, the skills that they've developed, but also how they found integrating the content is really, really important. And then as educators, we can make changes to the scenario or how we roll it out. So I think by having that mindset of having a good go, and definitely set up the fact that we're all having a go in the seminar, we know we're not all familiar with this type of scenarios, is really, really important to set up the scenarios as much as possible.
And so, how did you integrate the OER into your subject? And I guess what impact did that have on the student engagement?
Yeah, so I introduced the OER in my week 1 lecture. So it's sort of like, hey, look what I've developed. I've developed this OER for the unit, and I go through how we're going to use it. And I find students get a sense of like, wow, my unit chair lecturer has really put in time and effort into creating something special for them. And so, in terms of the impact it's had on student engagement, the OER is designed by nature to create an engaging learning environment, taking the educator through, how to sort of facilitate that. And I've seen the impact it's had on students. So they are and have enjoyed the role plays. Feedback has highlighted that the engaging nature of the role plays, its relevance to the real world. Students have even given me feedback on how they've implemented their skills in their current jobs. So it's having an impact on their learning, which is obviously the key thing, but also their professional lives as well.
I love that it extends beyond just the educational institution and into lifelong learning as well.
I really like that authentic experience that you put the students into. I think that brings a lot of benefit and that sense of active learning for them. And I like how you emphasize from the start on being clear about the objectives, the learning objectives, what students are going to take away with them after finishing this or doing that scenario, the competencies, the skills that they're going to take away with them. That's fantastic. I know Ash, she's got also something to ask about this because it's a conversation that we always have when we meet with open education advocates and people who work on open education everywhere in the world, I guess. It's a very similar conversation and a challenge at the same time, talking about the quality of the open educational resources.
Yeah, I think you were kind of leading into that already, Sarah, when you were saying that you take cues from the students to see how can these cases be improved and these scenarios be improved. And that talks to one aspect of OER that's really great is that you can just improve it. The product that you put out doesn't have to be the final thing and you wait, a year or two for the next edition. You can update it as soon as it's relevant to. And I think that's what can make OER so great and high quality and current. Could you talk a little bit more about how you've ensured the quality of your OER and how you can see that happening in OER in general?
Yeah, really good question. Thanks, Ash. Yeah, the quality of OERs is something that people are talking about, and it is something that you really need to think about when you are developing an OER. So, for example, feedback and continuous improvement should be something that should be a huge priority when you're going through and developing your OER. So, think about how can you bring in peer reviewers or how can you get an external peer review is really, really important. Last year, I was invited as a guest, as a panel speaker at the OER Collective Community of Practice on the topic of peer review. And I spoke about how my OER was actually selected to undergo an external peer review by Merlot and the Business Editorial Board. So that was something that really has helped added to the credibility. But I also involved peers during the process. I got their feedback from other academics, but I also turn to the students and I get their feedback. I have a look at it and see where their improvements can occur. And as you mentioned, Ash, it's very easy for me to go in and make those adjustments in real time for students when we roll it out for the next trimester.
Wonderful. And the other useful part as well, because, if you're making updates to an OER and somebody is using that OER, then there can be a question of, well, how do I know that what I'm using is the right version or that if it has been updated? And so there's really useful version history pages on these OER and you can keep track of what's going on with it. You can submit, I guess, a form of errata. As a reader, you can submit suggestions to the author. There are so many ways that these texts can be quality assured through many peers, not just through the formal peer review process, but through practitioners as well, people actually using the text and providing their feedback, and students using the text and providing their feedback. It's wonderful how many avenues Open actually does provide for high quality resources.
Yeah, and just referring to my example earlier, I mean, the academic that reached out from the Germany University and her feedback on the applicability, and she wanted some Australian examples as well. And so she also provided some feedback on how she's using it in her classroom. And I was just going to add a tip that I picked up actually from the peer review topic that we discussed last year at the community of practice was actually to have like a feedback form in the OER. So actually seeking some feedback from those that are using it. So for example, people don't have to directly reach out to you, but they could put some feedback in there is another great way to get feedback.
That's an excellent idea, actually. Just do it within it. I feel the openness aspect of the open educational resources and the work that we do in this domain allows for that transparency, which is not something necessarily we have when we read like a publisher content. Often we don't get that access to the peer review feedback. So I think that's an advantage.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic, Sarah. Sarah, one takeaway for our listeners that they can just start doing it today, what would you recommend?
Okay, so no surprises. I would suggest reading our wonderful Open Education Down Under case studies OER. There are many valuable tips in there, lots of examples of different OER projects and approaches. So if you're thinking of creating a new OER or even adapting an existing one, I would start there. I would also take some time to really think about the why. So why is it that you're wanting to create an OER? Like, can you adapt an existing one, or do you really need to create one from scratch? It does take time, so having a think about that. But also, ultimately, thinking about how it's going to contribute to students. What's the benefit? Keeping in mind your learning objectives, we need to have that alignment, keeping in mind the applicability and the usability of the book so that other educational providers can use it and benefit from it as well, as I've outlined earlier.
Fantastic. These are really excellent tips. And one of the reasons, as you said, Sarah, why we created this book is actually to invite people to adapt those case studies into their context and benefit from what these case studies claiming to do to the student learning experience. Sarah, when we have guests, and we're always curious to learn more about what they have lined up for their future. So what's coming up for you in this domain?
Yeah, so with my OER, as you know, it's the 15 role plays. I do have plans in the future to add a video element to that. So that being around the instructions, but also perhaps demonstrating some of the skills that students could use. So that is one thing that's on the horizon. The other thing that I'm working on for this year is I'm working with a colleague on an AI project. So it's a bit hush hush, but the one of the outcomes of the project is to hopefully create an OER on AI in higher education. So stay tuned for that.
Oh my gosh, how exciting. And hush hush, that's okay, we won't tell anybody.
I can't give away all my secrets.
And so where can people find you if they want to connect? Do you have social media accounts? Yeah, where can people look?
So in terms of where to find me, you can find me via my LinkedIn page. So just searching Dr. Sarah Steen. I would be more than happy for you to connect with me. Please do reach out. I'm always keen to chat all things open education and OER. So via my LinkedIn page.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
No worries. Thank you so much.
Wow, how great is Sarah? I want to go back to uni just to take her class. She clearly cares so much about her students, and her open education work is already having such a positive impact on her students' learning.
Yes, Ash. My takeaways from our conversation with Sarah are two main things. The first one are myth-busting OER quality concerns, which I really appreciated her sharing her own peer review experience and being invited to being a reviewer of an existing OER. So that was really great to hear. The other one is when she talked about integrating OER into teaching practices, which is always my favorite, as you know, Ash.
Yes, I am not surprised that that came up in our conversation today. Always a hot topic for you. I also loved how she talked about how OER and the practical learning activities can not only support student engagement, but can also be applicable beyond the classroom to support lifelong learning as well. So as we mentioned at the beginning of this episode, you can find the link to Sarah's Down on OER case study in the show notes, as well as links to the other resources she mentioned and her own chapter.
And we really hope that you enjoyed listening in on our conversation with Sarah. You'll soon find more episodes on our YouTube channel at Speaking of Open, as well as on Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts. Please give the episode and show a like, follow, comment. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you're keen to see more of what we're up to, you can find me at Ash the Librarian on all the things, Blue Sky, Mastodon.au and LinkedIn. And you can find Maze at Mace Patea on LinkedIn. The music in this episode is called Tomorrow, which is by Mermaid Guitar and released under a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 3.0 license. You can find that brilliant track and more at mermaidguitar.bandcamp.com.
So that's it for now. We'll chat to you next time. We are Speaking of Open. Negotiation and meditation. Now that OER
mediation.
Did I say meditation?
You did. That's all right. Take that one again.
Okay. This OER called Workplace Role Play Scenarios, Practice Navigation, Difficult Conversations, Negotiation, and Meditation.
You said meditation again.
Oh, gosh. Oh, yeah. I can't say mediation.
We need to meditate on this mediation.
Sorry. Mediation. What's wrong? Okay.
We got through.